So if all you rowdy poets can, be less rowdy, I know, an impossible ask as poets. It's a little thing, so. Oh wow, it got quiet on the second ask. That's a record, right? So, hey everybody. I know who most of you are, but in case you don't know, I'm James P. Wagner. Thank you all for being here today for the poetic remembrance of the one and only, and we will never see his like again, Marc Rosen. It's going to be a pretty informal, program, so to speak, because we're going to be sharing poems either about Marc, poems that Marc himself wrote, telling stories about Marc, combination of that thing, because it's really, it's called poetic remembrance, but it's really just like a celebration of life and all that or whatever. So I remember way back in 2008, way back before the days that I was fat and looked like a samurai who had been abandoned by his clan. The hair and all that. Back when I looked more like some of those pictures on that podium there. I was in a medieval literature class in my senior year at Dowling College. Dowling, here, no longer there. Taught by Dr. Gidding, who was a professor that I had for a lot of times or whatever. And I also, I had a habit of either following him in before class or after class to ask him about how do you publish stuff? So, precursor of, the omen of what I was to do in life, I guess. So, in this medieval literature class, he, one time he actually asked me after class, he's like, oh, have you met Marc Rosen? And my first response was, the guy who was asleep in the back of the class? Because Marc did that sometimes. But then when he would wake up, he would talk quite a lot in class. But I realized at first Dr. Gidding's scheme of introducing us was basically because both of us had a habit of trying to follow him down the stairs after class, and he kind of was thinking maybe he would get a reprieve if we were talking to each other instead. He didn't realize that he actually had just kind of exponentially cubicked his following, because now both of us together in tandem were following him down the stairs, up the stairs, trying to talk to him about the stuff. So it really just kind of made it worse. But that was how I first met Marc and became aware of his existence. And then we started talking a lot over, AOL Instant Messenger, good old AIM, back when that existed, for those who remember that. And he, like me, was up at all hours of the night. So, 4 o'clock in the morning when nobody was around for me to bother. Marc was there for me to bother, or for him to bother me, how it goes. But it was around that time that we basically perceived of the concept of, poetry and publishing that, because I found out, talking to Marc, that he was a poet. I was a poet. We shared our poems. I made mention to him that there was a Long Island poetry community, and, he should go and, be a part of it and come to some readings. And at first he was like, oh, I don't feel like that. And I'm like... I know, right? And I'm like, no, Marc, come on, you got this poetry, it's got to be shared. He was like, no! And I'm like, come on, Marc. So he's like, oh, fine, finally. And then brought him to an event, and he never stopped going. So you're welcome. No. He started actually showing up to, events like not long after that I wasn't even at, because at first I was driving him, and then eventually he was like taking 3 trains at the same time to get to events, and I didn't even know. I'd walk into a poetry event and see him. Oh, hi, Marc. That was going on. But, about that time we had the idea for, the first poetry anthology that Local Gems ever did, and then the next idea was Perspectives, the poetry anthology about autism, and that was Marc's idea. And that was basically when the precedent was set that, oh wait, we have a publishing company, don't we? And just kind of went on from there. So all the stuff, many of you I know have been to, lots and lots of our anthology launches, our book launches. Not a lot of people really know the full scope of how many places we act. Local gems is more like international gems, kind of at this point, even though we all focus on local communities. But we have poetry anthologies in New York, Virginia, everybody knows, Connecticut, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, North and South Carolina, Florida, Indiana, Wisconsin, Texas, California, Canada, and even a couple in the UK. And I don't really often share that entire list of how many places that we have, but today, just saying that all kind of sprouted from conversations with the good old Marc Rosen. So we'll be sharing plenty of stories about him throughout the day, because as a host or kind of co-host, because Nick is going to be co-hosting with me, because when I feel tired or have to go potty, he'll take over for me. But the benefit of that is we get to share as many stories as we want, so neener. But going to start off actually with a poem that I wrote for Marc. And this poem It was a couple days after I found out actually it was the night found out. And it was one of those poems that comes out with no resistance whatsoever. You know, a lot of times as poets we're like trying to get into the zone of writing and all that, and like workshopping and doing all these things. But sometimes the best poems just kind of emerge, and then you can't even really take credit for writing it because you feel like the muse just came down and you were just the vessel. So, and this is called Not All Flowers Bloom. I saw a rose in all its glory as I walked down the path on Main Street. Perhaps on this day I paid more attention to the miracle in front of me, admired it in a way I might not have the day before, after the news I got about you, my friend. I looked at this rose with a renewed understanding of its beauty, not just for what it was, but for the simple fact that not all flowers get to bloom. Not all roses show their petals. Not all in nature reaches the potential they had. So many things can happen. So many little things can alter the course of development and rob the world of these miracles, like you, my friend, gone at only 34. In so many ways, the beauty of your flower, not yet on full display, not yet fully formed, and now we will never get to see it in its entirety. But we saw some things. We saw hints of that vibrant color, the edges of the beauty and the miracle that you had the potential to be, and we now have to make do with what we know could have been, because not all flowers get to bloom. So, and now I'm going to call up Nick Hale to tell his own story, share his own poem, and just give me a break because, you know, emotional. So, yeah. Nick Hale.
Thanks, James. I think I will tell the story of the first time I met Marc. So, Marc, James, and I, along with two other poets, founded the Bards Initiative way back a long time ago. And Marc Rosen was a name I'd been hearing for a few years at this point, but I never actually met him. So we had some meetings, and I was living in Texas at the time, so I wasn't able to make it for those meetings in person. So I was always on a garbly phone call. Maybe there was a webcam, and I could see like the corner of Marc's forehead. But I never really knew the guy. I just mostly knew him by reputation until I came here for the first Bards Day. And I know some people here who were at that first Bards Day. It was kind of a crazy event. We were catering it ourselves. We had about 15 volunteers and only 3 of them did any work. And it was just a whole bunch of us young people running a poetry event. Marc was training into Huntington Station and texting James frantically that he needed a way to get from the station to the Birthplace. And James, who was doing like a million things at once, gave me his keys and he said, "Can you go pick up Marc?" So I get in this unfamiliar car driving down one of my least favorite roads in the whole world to go find Marc. I get to the station, he's standing there out in the sun baking, and he goes, "What took you so long?" And I gave him such a hard time for that comment for the rest of the ride here, and years later, when I brought this up, I remember the reaction on his face. I remember he felt guilty. He seemed like ashamed with himself that he had made that comment, that was his first impression to me. And I know that at the time, he was in that zone. He could not have not made that comment. But the fact that it felt so wrong to him all that later, and he felt like almost like he needed to make up for it, kind of spoke to the person he was. That, yeah, he was aware when stuff like that happened, he actually cared about his connections, his relationships with people. And that moment really sticks out to me, not just because it's a funny story, because that reaction is hilarious, but also just sort of how human it was and how very Marc that whole interaction was. Now, I don't have a poem for Marc yet, because it's still sort of sinking in to me. But I'm going to read one of his. Unfortunately, the one I wanted to read, I don't think he's ever published anywhere. So I'm going to steal his title poem and read Monster of 59 Moons, because I have seen him read this several times, and I have seen some really, really excellent readings out of Marc when he's reading this poem. 2 days after the first day of school, the principal got another screaming phone call. "Why is that monster still in my child's class?" 2 days after the first day of school, the principal gets another red-faced visitor. "Why isn't that freak in a retard home?" 2 days after the first day of school, the monster, the freak, goes into the office on an errand. He hears the screaming in person and on the phone and learns what the community thinks of him. I'm a freak? I'm a monster? The boy can't believe his ears. After living a paltry 59 moons and spending only 3 days in school, he is a monster. The weird doctor, with his weird tests, calls it autism. That doesn't mean a damn thing to the kid. No, a freak. No, a monster. He was a monster just by birth. Nothing could redeem his wretched heart. That day, he went home and asked his mommy, "Am I a monster?" And all she said was, "Yes." And the boy, with the grace of a man awaiting execution, walked silently to his room. Autistic monsters aren't allowed to show their tears.
I'd like to take a moment to remind everybody that not all poets are reliable narrators in the poem specifically, so that was not 100% autobiographical from him. Like, Nick, what about that story about the time that you read a poem that somebody knew was suicidal and then everybody came up thinking you were suicidal?
No, it was a poem about somebody who saw their friend die during childhood. It was completely made up.
Okay. So yeah, not all that's one thing about poetry. It's people write murder mystery fictions and nobody goes up to the author and is like, how's your serial killerness doing? But you write a poem about a serious topic, everybody automatically assumes it's you, but it's not necessarily. But there was, he wrote a lot about a lot of experiences he heard about, and some of them were whatever. But so I'm going to read one of Marc's poems now, a bit of a funnier one that I can relate to myself, simply called Shiny. Sitting with my laptop, cursor blinks again for a blank file. Shine this to the journal. Litanies of woes, memories of the past. Ooh, shiny. Mother Shiner, I lost my place again. Shining shinies always getting in the way with their shininess. Pretty shiny, go away. I'm trying to write, damn it. Shiny, shiny, shiny. I love and hate you so. Your pretty shine attracts me, and there my focus goes. Come on, Shiny, get the shine out, please. I really do need to get back to work. ADD, ladies and gentlemen. So, going to call the first poet on the list up. That would be Vinnie Colon.
Thank you. Thank you. I, unlike most of you, didn't know Marc. I only knew Marc through you. So when my wife said to me, "Why are you going to this thing today? You didn't even know this person." I said, whoa, hold on a second. I knew all the people that he knew. So I wrote a poem this morning that I think Marc would have enjoyed. It's called The Rumpus Room of My Soul. In the corner, stacked against the wall, are the toys, all heaped in a pile, waiting to be played with again. Poetry, to me, is like a rumpus rule in my soul. Free verse, like the Stretch Armstrong doll. You could throw it against the wall, wrap it around a table leg, it snaps back magically, miraculously, fun for hours on end. Haiku, more like a tea party. A neat table and chairs, with napkin and doily, 3 different tiny spoons. Form, a Tinker Toy set, still in its box, with 3 pages of instructions, similar and dissimilar parts, fit together somehow after hours of toil. Blank verse, what's this? A distant cousin of the former, but so much more freeing. Now sentences can go on forever ad infinitum. Then there's the concrete poem, like the Etch-a-Sketch on the desk. Punch cards eager for selection, colored pegs searching for a home. The room is a mess, with broken crayons never to be returned to their boxes, snacks of all kinds mashed into the carpet, dog hair, cat hair, and the scent of mischief lingering in the air. Thank you.
Thank you, Vinny. Next, let's give a hand for the longtime host of the BJ Spoke Gallery, the one and only Kelly Powell.
Hello, friends of Mark. It's an honor and a sadness to be here. We're celebrating Mark's life, though, as we did Barb. I think everyone should do that. I met Mark at the Lindenhurst Library, and he had taken 82 trains to get there. I was impressed immeasurably by that. And I just liked him ever from there. He did read at my gallery. He asked my daughter Luna, is transgender, for a poem for the Stonewall's Legacy. But Luna's not a poet, and I thought maybe Mark would be a little too persistent for her. Like she probably would have said politely, I don't write poetry. She's a writer of grand scale, but not poetry. And so he asked me for a poem, and I'm like, okay, I guess I'm an ally, would you say? So this was in the Stonewall's Legacy. I'm very proud of that. And I was at one of the readings with the inimitable Rusty, Mark's partner in crime. I know Mark was an atheist, but this has a bit of a Christian bent. It's called Another Boy Risen, for Matthew Shepard and his family's terrible loss. You are yesterday's news now, lovely boy, turned to yet another Christ figure at your death. But in life, I see you laughing, a toddler clapping hands together or touching grass or sand, grains and leaves running through small fingers, or your first Christmas tree lights twinkling, your wonder brighter than any star. We have all of us known joy like that, even if we cannot remember just now. Your friends and classmates are older now and have had their losses. This is as sure as the sun will rise. Forgive them. They know better now. Forgive us all. Thanks.
Thank you, Kelly. Yeah, a lot of people are probably wondering why Mark took so many trains to so many events. Well, like the first several years he was going, he wasn't driving, didn't have a car or whatever, which is probably a good thing because when he had the car, one time Mickey and I were going to a Mexican restaurant to meet Mark actually, and I'm driving by and then suddenly a car comes in like, zoop, and like doesn't see me and almost hits me, and I'm like, wouldn't that be sad if we like died on the way to see Mark? And then, Nick's like, he's like, maybe that was Mark. And then I pull right next to the car, and it's like, oh God, it was Mark. so maybe the trains are a little safer. Next, let's give it up for the one and only Antonio Madly Love. And Mark Madly loved him.
Yeah.
Thank you. It was a shock to me when James called me and told me that Mark was dead. And it's a shock still now because he was a young man. He was too young for that. And made me think about how volatile how life is. And with that in mind came a thought that I'm paraphrasing a saying from an old wise book that say, redeem your time, for the time is at hand. We don't know. My hand on my wall could happen right now as I'm speaking. Did I redeem my time? My poem today is, there is a place. There is a place where light is never pale, where the lion will never devour a lamb. There is a place where gale and tempest are put to rest, where deep scars and tears can be wiped away with all pleasant cares. Now, the realm could be found, has the beating heart resound, but at hand we shall be called, and the place of bliss, our eternal home. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Antonio, and you're definitely right about that, because, as I was, trying to hold it together while making this poster board yesterday, when I sat back and looked at it, I realized that, 13, 14 years of memories is on that board, and it's really like the moment, life really happens when you're not paying attention, because it's like, that long really went by, didn't it? Also, I'd like to, for all the engineers in the audience, I'd like to say there's a lot of money to be made for somebody who makes a microphone that automatically adjusts to the height of the poet as we're coming up, because we have this happen all the time, and
A smart mic.
yes, we need a smart mic. So next up, of course, no poetry reading having to do with Marc would be complete without her. Marc looked at her as a walking history book of LGBTQ in a good way. He admired her very, very much. They formed kind of like a master-apprentice bond that was really something to behold. And they co-edited Stonewall's Legacy Anthology together, which I was very happy to publish. So let's give it up for the one and only Rita Rusty Rose.
Thank you. And I was in that car a lot of times when Marc went whizzing by.
We were praying for you.
I heard that.
Anyway, my condolences to Marc's loving mother and his brothers and sisters and all of us who knew him. Marc was my dearest friend, co-editor, fellow poet, Hofstra Law student, disability and LGBTQ rights advocate, and much more. He wore many hats, did so much, touched so many in the short time he was here on earth. Time spent with Marc was a pleasure and often an adventure. I appreciated his soft-spoken, shy, introspective nature, his sincere smile, his impish, light-hearted giggle, and his fighting spirit, especially when he was about to get on his soapbox to advocate for positive change. He was people-oriented and always was a champion for others' rights. I was proud of Marc as I witnessed his fierce intelligence firsthand, as he advocated for those less fortunate, and whenever he spoke out at New York City LGBTQ meetings. I was honored that he thought so much of me as to add his 2 cents whenever I had to lecture. To him, I was his sage, his confidant. He always asked my opinion and advice. Marc was certainly a warrior not to be reckoned with, especially in the field of disability and gay rights. He would argue the point until it was changed, and more often than not, he'd win. Many here will remember Marc sitting apart, looking down at his phone. But I learned Although he was deep in thought, he heard every word that was said, and if you recall, when asked, he responded. And you know, Mark liked you right off when he opened up, held you hostage in conversation. He had so much to say, so much to offer once you knew him. I spoke hours with Mark as he shared phone conversations, sat on my porch while we were driving around recklessly in that car, and even over the meals we shared. He was a concerned, selfless man, even though he himself had many health issues. And whenever he'd be out of town, he always made sure I knew. Often he'd call me as he traveled by Amtrak to Albany, down the East Coast, wherever he was. Now, a lot of you may not know this, but in a time of disaster, like Hurricane Irene and Sandy, Mark worked for FEMA, filling out forms and helping those who lost homes and needed placement. As the mother of the modern-day LGBTQ movement, I was honored to pass the torch to Mark. He was very involved with our history, the injustices, and the preservation of, especially my history, the way he wanted people to remember me. And it was his plan after getting a degree. He would have the clout not only to safeguard writings about me and guide my daughter in doing so, but to correct history wrongfully being written. He was captivated by my community's past and often asked me to speak about what it was like to be gay in a time before he was born. That he seen me as a wealth of information and, yes, a dinosaur in a new world. He wanted to know how I was, how I fit into the scheme of things. When Mark passed away, friends told me how Mark adored me. But I knew by his actions, and he often told me so in poems, by his thoughtfulness, and by not forgetting me. You know, when you become old in this society, you tend to be forgotten. You know, you ask for a ride to a poetry read or just to go for an ice cream, but never by Mark. He made sure I remained visible to the millennials of today, and that they know the importance of who I was and what I had done for them. He escorted me to rallies, protests, meetings, and so many events. And he beamed when I was afforded the attention. And I passed it on to him too, by having him stand with me as a dedicated friend while news reporters and photographers interviewed and snapped pictures. Mark was a loving, sincere, compassionate man. And whenever I told a story to him, he would remind me to talk slowly and clear so that I may preserve your legacy. Very Hitchcockian. Also, because of his sincerity and dedication to me and my community, I offered him the rare opportunity to witness history being made firsthand by inviting him to Stonewall Veterans meetings in Manhattan. And while there, I introduced Mark to many important friends, both in gay history and in policy making. Following our meetings, we had dinner with legislators, senators, police department, and PBA heads. And joining us often was my friend, the legendary LGBTQ attorney Hal Weiner, the film director and producer Pam Leone, Manhattan Borough President Gail Brewer, Senator Diane Savino, and the list went on, and Mark was thrilled. He could not believe I knew so many important people. And I would humbly smile and nod my head. And the most memorable time that I'll never forget was when I formally introduced him to Hal Weiner. And his eyes bugged out, his jaw dropped, and would you believe that was the only time I ever saw Mark lost for words? And Joseph, you also had come to meetings and met a lot of the Stonewall pioneers. But Marc, I found out, idolized Hal. He was an attorney that it was on his bucket list to meet him, and he did at an informal gathering. And Marc longed to become a charter member, a friend of the New York City Stonewall Veterans Association, and he is forever now listed as a dedicated friend. And I'm sure our members all will agree to keep Marc's name on our roster forever. And to share with you how determined Marc could be, during the 50th anniversary of the Stonewall riot, that is an LGBTQ pivotal turning point in history, one which I participated in, I suggested to Marc that we put forth an anthology, a collective effort by all gay poets. And Marc thought it a great idea, and we set in motion the anthology Stonewall's Legacy. He insisted I find an early photo of me to grace the front of the book. He literally jumped up and down when I showed him a few photos. It was of pioneers he had only read about, like Dave West and Queen Allison Alante and Sylvia Rivera and me in earlier marches. Marc and I managed to put out a submission call and was overwhelmed by poets across the globe competing to join us in this important historical book. It was hard to choose. Many a great poet had to be left behind. And while I'm mentioning publishing, Marc also wore the hat of treasurer for the Bards Initiative for Local Gems Press. And we spoke often about a second Stonewall anthology. So perhaps when I'm up to doing it, James Wagner, publisher, I hope we write a Stonewall Legacy tribute to Marc. But let me go back real quick and tell you more about Marc and the conversations between us. As Marc and I traveled in that car to promote our legacy, I asked him about his plans for the future, and at the time he didn't know. It was unclear to him, but yet it was clear to me. It only seemed natural that Marc would attend Hofstra University to become an attorney. He was already skilled and good at it, and so this is what he set out to do. And all of you should know that Marc was only weeks away from taking the bar exam. I was confident he would have passed. And currently, Hofstra University has named a Marc Rosen Scholarship in his honor. So if you'd like to donate, do phone Hofstra Law. Now, on a funny note, Marc would not take the bar in New York City. He said he wanted to take them upstate. And I said to Marc, "How come, Marc?" And he smugly replied, "Well, Rusty, they have better hotels there." That was Marc. He had also applied to law firms and was accepted, and his career would have flourished had he been here. And of course, Marc's chosen field was disability and civil rights law. And lastly, I would like you all to remember Marc as a phenomenal published poet who had a quiet brand of humor and authenticity. And he performed this one poem with sound effects like a beep, and after each line he'd beep. And his face would round and he'd smile, and when friends laughed too, he would turn beet red. And he'd take a moment to soak in all of our reactions. And on stage, all you would see is this red contrast against his bright yellow shirt or his favorite tie-dye. And the first time Marc surprised me, I think it was here at the Walt Whitman Birthplace when he read one of his poems he had penned for me. It was an honor to have this young man immortalize me in words. But after Marc died, I found another poem he had written for me, and I'm going to read that in a moment. He was a great friend in our poetry community. He was a wonderful friend of mine. He is so missed by me, and I am still reeling from the sudden loss of Marc. He's irreplaceable. For me, the loss is great, as if I lost a grandson. And my daughter Melanie shares in the same grief. She misses Marc's generous spirit. And she laughs when we recall Marc enjoying a pizza party with us while working on anthology edits. And in our home, a candle burns bright on the mantle in his memory, and will continue to do so. And although he's gone into the celestial, I'm sure he could hear me say, Mark, I love you. You will never be forgotten. And friends, ponder this. If there's a problem right now in heaven, you know that Mark is the angel handling all the complaints. And now, before I read Mark's poem and my response, I want to share something that happened recently on the 1-month anniversary. I began to search through his poems in Stonewall Anthology and decided not to read a gay risque one. I was looking for something more sedate for this memorial, and I fell asleep with several unopened anthologies in my hand. And Mark visited me in my dream and suggested I open the publications and read each one. So when I awoke, I skimmed through the books until I opened to a 2019 poem, In the Hero's Kitchen. I did not know it was there. And once again, Mark had immortalized me in words. And as I sobbed, I penned my response, and I'm going to read it now, as is. With, of course, I said my response. In the Hero's Kitchen by Marc Rosen. I sit in the hero's kitchen, both our laptops open, reading email after email. The same woman who aided the drag king, who threw Stonewall's first punch with a right hook of her own, swapping stories with me as we review poem after poem, poet after poet, seeking additions to her legacy. We break for pizza, to stretch, to pet her dog, hour after hour until we are done. And all I could think was that without her, I would leave no legacy for Stonewall. And this is my response. Alone, sitting shiver. To live in hearts we leave behind is not to die. Poet Thomas Campbell. Rolling one blown onyx bead after another, I pause to hold a solitary glass rainbow. My thoughts are on you, 34 and taken too soon. Your ambition was to preserve my stories, poems, and legacy. In nature's order, the senescent trailblazer should have parted first. But here I am, grieving, beads between fingers, meditating on stories we shared, our poems, our adventures, the little things forever linking your legacy to mine.
Thank you, Rita, for that wonderful comedic episode. No, I know. It was kind of hard to follow that. Because, yeah, I mean, and just as a little bit of my own example of how much Mark, worshipped Rita and was there all the time, literally. Because in addition to Stonewall, I published another one of Rita's poetry books. And actually was going over to her house to drop them off. And so coming up to the thing, whatever, she opens the door, lets me in, like a little dog comes and greets me or whatever. I have the box in, I walk in there, turn around, and Mark's sitting there in the living room. I'm like, oh, hi, Mark. It's like, I didn't know you were going to be here. He's like, I didn't know you were there. I just came over on a whim. So Just to show how he was. He was always over there. I don't think I was ever actually at Rita's house when Mark wasn't there at this point. So he loved every moment he could spend with Rita, and yeah, he was. It was really endearing to see the wonderful student mentor relationship that they had really formed. And you are right that if there's any litigation going on in heaven, Mark is at the forefront. Mark, as you know, was very, very, very for disability rights, sometimes to the point of a little bit silliness in some cases. Like one story I will share to try to lighten the mood. All of you know, the Perspectives Anthology is actually really the one that put Local Gems kind of on the map, which is poetry about autism that Mark and I co-edited. We got invited to all sorts of conventions and autism festivals and things like that. We had tables everywhere. It sold like hundreds and hundreds of copies. It was a really big deal at the time. It was like, oh wow, I didn't know anybody actually cared this much about poetry, but turns out they do if it's about something important. Lesson, everybody. But got to a point where we're putting together. I was putting together the flyer because I was more the graphic design of Mark's 99 superpowers. Graphic design was not one of them. If he ever made a flyer, it usually was a wall of text, kind of like with his thought process, just like you couldn't really read it. I remember him going up to dowling people in the cafeteria, like handing out a flyer, and them looking at it like, "What is this?" Because it was just like words. But so I designed the flyer with like a picture. Good for the average person's attention span. And so I had all this stuff, and it was supposed to be sent out to libraries, to like if they wanted copies for their circulation or whatever. So I send a copy to Mark to be like, all right, what do you think of this flyer? And he tells me, I will not approve it. And I'm like, why won't you approve it, Mark? He's like, it's not in a PDF file that is transferable to text-to-speech. And I'm like, well, what does that have to do with anything? He's like, the blind librarians are not going to be able to read it. And I was like, blind librarians? Like, I'm like, but wouldn't it be the library's job to have the thing? I'm like, Mark, I get what you're going for, but like, we're making a flyer here. We don't have like Elon Musk's technology. Come on, whatever. So, but yeah. So sometimes he was a little over the top, but he was always just a little bit. But his heart was always in the right place and for the right thing, and that's, I think, what we're all really remembering at this point. So, in that vein, I'd like to call up the next guest, and that would be Monica Joyce. I lied. Guessing this was determined to be the sign-in sheet and not the sign-up sheet, so that happens. All right. However, I do know the next one is actually going to read, and that would be the one and only groupie, Margaret Walt.
I met Mark at Wild Child Tattoo Parlor. We actually had a poetry event inside of a tattoo parlor. And I remember this particular time I was advocating for one of my students that had autism, and he had such great advice to help me with one of my students. And then eventually what happened is we were at a Nassau County Poet Laureate ceremony, and James reminds me of this story all the time because it's very funny. So they have all the politicians of the current laureates getting inducted, and there's all these people in their shirts and their ties and all prim and proper. So they have an open mic after. So Mark, he never had a filter. So he would come up and he would read anything. So he pulls out his paper and he's just like, this is for all the transvestites in the room. And everybody was just like, and here I am, I'm a new person to the poetry scene, and I'm thinking, wow, so that's what they mean by open mic. You can say anything. So with that, I'm honored to read one of his poems that I always loved seeing him perform. And it's In the Praise of George Carlin, an absurdist sermon revised. There once was a great and holy man, beloved by many, despised by equal numbers, the great George Carlin. Praise be his name, and praise be his most sacred of incantations. A chant so powerful, so magnificent, so glorious, it pissed off not just an entire nation. No, the great George Carlin, praise be he, wouldn't settle for that. He rallied up the entire world with his holiest of holy mantras. Can I get an hallelujah?
Hallelujah!
Yes, great glory, hallelujah, praise be to the Carland and his most sacred of sacred chants. And of course, there is that part that Rusty discussed where we have to do the right thing here and push. If I can get it to come up. I don't know if it's going to work or not. It'll be off in a minute. Let these holy words smite to the prudest heavens and bring eternal glory unto his name. Long live Marc. So, a lot of the poetry community know that whenever you had a Bard's event, you would walk in, I'd be in the middle, Julian Wagner would be on my right, and Marc always had the seat on my left. So this poem I wrote this morning, and it's called Empty Chair Left. Today we honor my friend, a guy who made me laugh, even smiled along at his own expense. Today we remember a man who played a role in the autism community, advocacy and a voice, not shameful, but powerful. Today we respect a gay individual who avoided closets and stereotyped labels, wasn't silenced by biased audiences, shared his story through his poetry. Today we wish for a future that looks like the one he was aiming for, one he wanted. Today, I recognize the empty chair on my left behind, so quiet now, it stands. But this guy, we grew to know that once filled this voided space, he is a face and a memory that we will never forget. Thank you.
And as for what words were occurring during the beep, you can either remember what George Carlin was famous for, or get a copy of Marc's book and find out. Next up on the list, the alien among us, Ryan Jones. Seen here with much shorter hair.
Thanks. That alien miracle grow wasn't happening back then. But speaking of that picture, I don't know exactly when that was taken, but I had my first experience with a lot of things at the roast. The first poetry reading that I ever actually went to was Sachem Library, and there was someone there that eventually told me I should go to the roast in Batjog for another kind of reading, and eventually I caved and went, and there was a night of a lot of firsts. The first was finding out what a Corvinus is, and nothing after that could compare, but close. The second thing I learned for the first time is what a James and Jillian is, complete with a box full of the hot off the press Local Gems book. It was purple. I don't know anything else about it.
Sounds of Solace.
Yes, thank you. And after a too long pause, they were waiting for something. I just didn't know what it was. And then someone with a floppy top came in and started talking with no introduction, as if he knew everyone in the building, and he didn't know me, so I just sort of had to figure it out. So before I even knew who it was, I kind of got a hint of what was to come when, out of a pocket that is too small, really, for what came out, a big, shiny, sparkly pink envelope for money. So it was about 2 hours after that, I finally had to ask somebody, who is that? Oh, that's Marc. Just Marc. Well, Marc Rosen. I guess I just should have known. But anyway, that was November 2013, so almost 10 years ago now. So I just figured I'd share a few fun facts about Marc that I learned just from being in proximity of Marc Rosen. First would be he's an atheist, which I think we've already heard, but he believes in the Yeti. Another fun fact about Mark is he really, really, really likes recliners. Like, if you're not sure if the venue has a recliner, if Mark's on it, yeah. I guess, the third thing is, a lot of people have been reading some of his more recent poems, in addition to other stuff, of course, now that, unfortunately he's passed. And a lot of times they're reading what I would call his paladin poems. So just related to that, I do know that Mark thinks that the foam sword I used for some of my poems as a prop is nice. So that's just a segue into this thing that I've written recently, and of course, given the circumstances, it's a little bit inspired by Mark with the metaphors and imagery, not necessarily about him, but thanks, Mark, for helping me write this one. It's called The Challenger's Survey. A worn and weary warrior surveys himself. Another confrontation for this challenger. Yet another hard-fought slogging match to a draw. No ground was taken, yet still no ground was given. The survey brings to light the expected results. A twice-broken sword to match its broken wielder. A shattered shield to protect its shattered holder. An impacted helm to mirror impacted thoughts. But now he observes new symbols of his fatigue. The warping of his bow reflects his warping will. His last arrow spent, like his spent constitution. His spear is splintered, as is his sense of purpose. His quiver and sheath are as empty as his hope. His daggers are as dull and blunt as his drive. His pennant, like his morale, flags in the cool breeze. His torn mail as rusted as his tarnished resolve. His chipped and cracked axe is as drawn as his patience. His belt has frayed just as his very beliefs have. His cloak just as much in tatters as his values. His boot soles are punctured through as his spirit. This last challenge has laid bare his condition. No longer will he be able to maintain ground. Here and now he vows never to challenge again, abandoning his ground for worthier sentiments.
Yeah, the two things there. One, Mark was a big Dungeons and Dragons fan. Two, sometimes when Jones reads a poem, he has a really big, somewhat dilapidated, which I guess is his theme, like I told, a dilapidated foam sword that he would hold up to do it. And I remember, I think the first time that Mark ever saw him do that, Jones was sitting on the side, sitting there, and Mark comes over, and I don't know if Mark was being funnily suggestive or just didn't realize how it came up, but he was like, "I really like your sword." And Jones was like, "Oh, okay." And speaking of that, actually, a lot of Mark had health problems, and for a while he was using a cane to kind of help him or whatever. But he did not just have a cane; that would be too simple. He had this big ass freaking wizard staff, decorated with all kinds of fantasy elements. And when you asked him about it, too, Mark, why you walk like that? He basically said, "It's my fucking shillelagh." So Mark had a flair for everything he did. Next, give a warm welcome for one of the original Examination 39, who was there when we launched our first anthology, Douglas G. Sweeley.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here to remember Mark. I can't even remember the first time that I met him. I'd known him quite some time. As James mentioned, for the first Examination anthology, probably was around the first time that I met him, maybe earlier than that. I used to host a reading series at the Barnes & Noble in East Northport, and he was there religiously every month. Always in the back row, and always had something to share. And a good attitude about that. And when he could, he made it out to the current series that I run at James's store. But I do remember that he was very excited about the Perspectives anthology, and I did a reading specifically for the anthology, and we had a huge audience. There must have been at least 50 people there. He was very proud of it, so I wanted to read a poem of his from this anthology called What? I'm not a genius. I'm not a retard. I'm not an idiot. I'm not a freak. I'm not a saint. I'm not a sinner. I'm not evil. I'm not good. I'm not a hero. I'm not a villain. I'm not cruel. I'm not kind. I'm not normal. I'm not abnormal. Do you get it yet? No, then I'll keep going. I'm not wise. I'm not foolish. I'm not loving. I'm not hateful. I'm not perfect. I'm not wrong. I'm not what you wanted. I'm not a monster. I'm not a pervert. I'm not a child molester. I'm not you. I'm not wrong. I'm not wrong. I'm not wrong. So do you know what I am yet? If you do find out, be sure to let me know so I can add another I'm not to the list.
Thank you, Doug. And yeah, I know for a fact that when you had the Barnes & Noble reading, that was one of Mark's favorite ones to go to. So. Next, let's give a hand for Alex Edwards Boudreaux.
I always admired Marc at readings. I never got to know him, unfortunately. And one of my favorite little collections, actually, is titled Monster of 59 Moons. The title just absolutely grabbed me, so I grabbed the book. And this is one of the poems that struck me in the book. I was very impressed with Marc's authenticity. Some say I should crave your touch, need it as I would a glass of water on a summer's workday. Some say I should beg for your acceptance, rely on it as much as I do on air. Some say I should tell you those 3 words, utter them casually each day, whether I know I fully mean them or not. Some say that's what love is, a codependent, crippling, agonizing mess that has to lead to jealous commitment or theatrical performances. I say we can do better than that.
Thank you, Alex. Next up, we know Marc for a very long time, and he used to come to the page 1 reading pretty often back when Marc hosted that in Red Cove. Let's give it up for WrestleMania Rasputin.
Page 1 was fun. So yeah, we've lost a member of our poetry family. I was never real close with Marc, but he was, like Doug was saying, I can't remember a time when Marc was not on the scene. He's always been part of the community, and he will always be synonymous in my mind with everything James and Jillian are doing. With the bards and everything you guys do. Your events will never be the same without him. His energy will remain for sure. Yeah, I guess the other thing that comes to mind is, as others have mentioned, Mark would always say what's on his mind. He was always very genuine. There was no guesswork. And I always admire that in people, because I remember growing up where there, people would be polite and say things, in kind of a veiled message, and I was always like confused. And I always appreciated people that would just tell you what's on their mind, whether you agree with it or not. And that was always Mark. So I always loved and appreciated that about him. And so I chose a poem also from his book Monster of 59 Moons, and other poems. And what a title! Like, it doesn't get any more original than that. I used to be co-editor in a press in the city, and like we always said, like, we need something that's going to really grab your attention. And if this book cover and title doesn't grab your attention, then you have to question whether you're awake. So I picked a very short poem that's I think very fitting from the book. And actually, I have to give credit where credit is due. My good friend Kelly J. Powell helped me pick this out. Yeah. I was in the examination anthology. Oh, yes, you're right.
Another member of the original 39.
Yeah. God, it's been so many years. So many years. I mean, you guys are all, the original people from back in the day. Anyway, all right, without further ado, as Barbara Myers would say, just read the poem. Another one in our family that we lost a few years ago. Eternity. The hourglass has fallen, the grainy contents spilled, the gentle breeze transformed into a ghost. It's actually into a gust, but ghost works too. And so the sands of time are scattered to the winds. Now nothing more than ordinary dust. Thank you.
Thank you, Russ. Yeah, for those who don't know, when I'm referring to the original 39, that was the first anthology Local Gems ever published was called the Examination Anthology. It was called that because at the time I was the Long Island Poetry Examiner, which was a hyper-local online news thing, and Mark was actually at the same time the Long Island Autism Examiner, which is why we kind of had, when the Perspectives idea happened, it was like, well, at the poetry angle, the autism angle, combined them, and what do you get? Bibbidi-bobbidi bestseller, apparently. But there was... the first anthology, there were 39 poets in, and half of that was Barbara Ray Myers. She put it out on her newsletter. We had the Dowling College Spoken Word Club, which myself and Mark were a part of. And back then I was like, oh wow, 39 poets. That's a lot. Nowadays it's like 39 poets. That's not enough for an anthology. It's like we have the local one here for Long Island is usually about 150 to 160 every year, just to show how much bigger it's gotten. But yeah, page one reading. That was a reading. It was a great restaurant. They actually even gave us a separate $5 poets menu, I guess, because they knew poets are perpetually on a budget for our entire lives, But it actually happened because the first reading that we ever did was at a place called Wizards, which was actually literally like a few doors down from where, for those of you who know where my bookstore is, which is 250 Larkfield Road. Wizards was 275 Larkfield Road. It's like my whole life happened on Larkfield Road, kind of, except for Dowling. But anyway, but then they closed down because, I guess, just doing Wizards readings wasn't enough to pay the rent in New York, because it turns out it's expensive. Yeah, I know. I got rather disappointed when I found out that my landlord wanted the rent every month. It was a big deal. But so then Mark was like, oh, I know a restaurant, in Glen Cove by me that I went to all the time. And so he hooked us up with page one. Glen Cove, of course, is very far from East Northport. And so back then, I used to, first I would go, living in East Northport, I would go pick up a guy who lived in Kings Park, drive all the way to Sayville where Jillian lived, and then drive from Sayville all the way to Glen Cove for that reading. And sometimes there'd be 5 people there. I'd be there for 2 hours and then drive all the way back to Sayville, then to Kings Park, then back to East Northport. And now in the post-COVID days, it's 6 miles away, I guess in terms of what you're willing to do. But the one downside of page one, though, is that there were two owners. Now, one owner really, really loved us, was really excited to have us, and whenever she was there, she gave us the banquet room that she promised us. The other owner was an angry old Greek guy with a cul-de-sac head and did not like us there. So whenever he was there and the other one wasn't, he would give us a table in a corner. And so we'd just be sitting around there kind of reading poems to each other like the exiles in the room, essentially. But so it was kind of like, so that reading only lasted about a year or so, but we had a good time while we were there, like Russ said. Next up on the list, give a hand for Joe Monasteri.
Hi everyone. So for those of you that don't know me, me and Mark were very, very close. I was another fellow disability advocate and LGBTQ advocate alongside Mark. There was many times where I would drive Mark up to Albany for advocacy and activism meetings. Mark was actually one of the people who got me into poetry. He was the one who dragged me to my first poetry reading. Mark was the inspiration, was one of the people who inspired me to write my poetry book, Butterflies in Space, which was actually last year when NASA launched Artemis 1 to the moon. My book was on there. And on that, what I didn't tell people was that I didn't just send my book, I sent my entire portfolio, and Mark's work was on there as well, because when I first released Butterflies in Space, it didn't feel complete, and Mark ended up helping, which Mark played a huge role in getting Butterflies in Space, helping me create Butterflies in Space, but he also challenged me to learn and grow from my work, and so we ended up creating this joint project, which was like a comic book, which really had like a Shel Silverstein feel, art-wise, where I was adapting both my poems and from Butterflies in Space and his poems from Monster of 59 Moons into a series called Queer Imaginings, which would later become the my current version of Butterflies in Space, which has everything, which has all of my poems adapted into it, which I really wanted to tell Mark about that, and I didn't get a chance to the day actually that I found out. That morning I was actually looking up on his social media and contemplating contacting him, and so yeah, but over the past year or two, I've really took stuff that Mark's inspired me when it comes to accessibility. I did an audio play of the book, and I've been animating it. And as of March, my book will be translated into Braille. But I'm going to read a poem that we wrote together called Queer Imaginings. But before I do that, I am going to say that, Mark, something really special about Mark was, there was a time where, I don't usually invite people over for Thanksgiving. There was a time where I invited Mark over for Thanksgiving. And there was just so many different things, but when we talk about Mark being an advocate, especially with disability advocacy, if there was a stairway to heaven, Mark right now would be he would make sure that he'd be arguing with everyone to make sure that there's a ramp or an elevator. But yeah, so Queer Imaginings. Two minds gather, filled with the absurd, ironic, and sometimes straight-up bluntness. They form a think tank, forming a canon of ideas. Before they know it, others gather, not fully understood. They prepared a fire, using a cannonball filled with their queer imaginings into a crowd that hadn't quite understood them. hoping the explosion it creates would help them understand the insights from the thoughts and ideas of the not normal.
As James mentioned, one of the benefits of being the host is we get to tell more stories. So I didn't get to hang out with Mark too much one-on-one. Most of the times we hung out together were when I was up here for various poetry events and we were with a group. Mark was a very different person one-on-one than he was with a group. When you were with him alone, you got pure unfiltered Mark. You got him, you got to really peel back the layers and see what was inside. And so we did have a few solo adventures. I know Rusty mentioned his time with FEMA. He actually came down to DC for some training, and he and I got together because I live not too far from DC right now. And it was really sort of eye-opening. I think that was the first time he and I hung out together. But the most memorable time was when we were up in Albany for the Families Together conference. We were giving a couple of talks on disabilities, autism, the cure mentality, and sensory overloads. And he and I shared a hotel room. Now, there's more to the story, and I'm going to leave to the side. And if James feels like telling the first part of the story, he can do that later. But I got there a little bit late. It was maybe 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock at night by the time I got there. And we had some things we need to go over for the presentation before we could go to sleep, because our presentation was early the next morning. Mark was lying in bed when I got in the hotel room. I said, well, we have a couple things we need to go over. He said, can it wait? No, we have to do it now. Fine, let me put some pants on. And as he's saying that, he takes the covers and whips them off of himself. So I turned away, and luckily, there was no harm done. Mark got his pants on. We went over our presentation. Our presentation was, in his words, a huge success, but nothing compared to the panel that we had later, where we had parents asking us very specific questions about how to deal with sensory overloads and things like that. Now, years later, we were at a restaurant, and I was telling this story about pants, and I did not mention who the person was who was putting the pants on, and Mark was sitting right next to me, and I thought Mark would pick up on it and recognize and say, oh yeah, that was funny, wasn't it? So after I tell the story, Mark turns to me and says, what idiots did that? And I said, you. And he goes, oh. Now, eventually, that was one other thing about Mark, is sometimes he wouldn't pick up on the things that happened in the past until you reminded him, though, that was you, or that, no, this happened, at X time. And I just thought that was a great story, but yeah, he's very different one-on-one than he was with the group. So, the next person I'd like to call up is Joellen Monasteri.
Yeah, hi. I'm not a poetry writer, but I got to know Mark many years ago when I would go on this bus trip to Albany for the legislative luncheon. And I can remember my first memories of him was him talking about trying to sell his book and talking about advocacy, and teaching me in his own way how to be a better advocate for my boys who are on the autistic spectrum. His death kind of came as a shock to me, as well as to many other people, but I can remember my best memories of him, though, is cooking that Thanksgiving dinner. And I can remember Joseph going, and I think Joseph went and picked him up because, you know, as we know, Mark was not the greatest of drivers. You know, and bringing him to our house in Uniondale. And Mark brought pie. You know, that was something he was famous for, was bringing pie when he would go to somebody's house to eat. And I want to say he will be truly missed. I appreciate everything that I was able to learn from him. You know, and one of the things that I would do too with my kids growing up, if they didn't want to go to school, and at the time, you know, when kids were in school, you know, the teachers always wanted that note, you know, for absenteeism. And one of the things that I used to do with my kids was if they weren't what I felt truly sick, but they had to stay home, I would say, okay, you write the note to your teacher, but everything must rhyme. And this is how I think poetry was introduced to my children. You know, I can also remember going to many, you know, New York State Families Together conferences and him being there, you know, and maybe sharing a room with one of my boys, with Joseph. You know, my son Zachary also used to go, and he got to know Mark quite well, you know, being on different boards and whatnot. And I'm grateful that he was able to help instill the advocacy that, you know, my sons have, and, you know, hopefully will be passed down to my grandchildren. Yeah, so anyway, thank you. As I said, I don't have a poem to read. Yeah, maybe I should pick one out of here. I don't know if this one, you know, I'm going to read Self-Determination. Give me choices and I will choose. Give value to my opinion and I will give it freely. Make me the employer and I will hire the right people. But first, I need you to let me. Let me move out of this group home. Let me live among you. Let me be heard when I speak in my language. Let me have the quality of life worth speaking of. Let me determine it for myself. And that's, as a parent, that's what you try to teach your kids to do. Thank you.
Next, I'd like to call up Ardio Boyle.
Well done on pronouncing my name. That must have been frightening. Okay.
I usually mispronounce at least one name at an event. I was trying to make this the exception.
Excellent, excellent. My name is Adiyuto Boyle, and I had the honor of meeting Mark just one time, but it was memorable. He was a sparkly person, very friendly, authentic, and I think a lot of people touched upon it, but the one thing that I noticed about him is he made me feel seen. He was drinking up everything I had to say, and I thought, wow, he's really living in the moment. So I definitely felt that. Also, a lot of things that I heard in the poetry revolved around light. So I'm going to dedicate this to Mark. And also, I can't make it bigger, and I'm blind. So, okay, here we go. Moments sparkle in our minds, reflecting life in a million little pieces, like the sun's brilliant light on the ocean surface. Diamonds trickling from our fingers, ringing like bells through a chamber.
one thing about Mark, he was definitely one of those people, when you got him interested in something, he just came to life. And, you see him at events, sometimes he'd be quiet, he'd be on his phone, until that moment when somebody mentioned the thing that he was passionate about, and then boom. So it surprised me one day when he told me he was an introvert. Because I knew him mostly in those contexts where you'd see that one spark happen and he'd get all excited. So next up, I'd like to call up Robert Savino.
I have known Mark for quite a number of years, and I have been held hostage by his conversation. But what I learned from it is there was much more to Mark than met the eye. If Charles Baudelaire were here today, he would say, today is the time to be drunken on poetry and virtue. I'm going to read Mark's poem from Poets to Come, the Walt Whitman anthology. It starts with a quote by Hideki. It all returns to nothing. It all keeps tumbling down, tumbling down, tumbling down. It all returns to nothing. It just keeps letting me down, letting me down, letting me down. Mark's poem is titled Broken Clock, Broken Mirror. An antique clock once ticked on the wall, faithfully recording the passage of each second, minute, hour, without falter or fail. Its glass shield shattered long ago. None came to repair or maintain the clockworks. Entropy claimed the clock, and time rusted. A vanity mirror once clung to the wall, reflecting all in the room with accuracy, not a single smudge or distortion to be found. Its shards now litter the barren floor. The frame remains in place, hanging uselessly. Never again will it be forced to show it. Time and space have shattered and rusted. None came, none knew, none cared, none remembered, none could forget. I'd also like to, as a memory, read this four-line poem by Rumi. And I've adjusted some of the words. I changed the we to us, the my to our, and the I to we. It's titled The Window. Your body is away from us, but there is a window open from our hearts to yours. From this window, like the moon, we keep sending secrets.
Thank you, Robert. So yeah, I do have to tell the first part of that story, since you all left wondering about the families together, Albany up and that. So there was this group called Youth Power that Mark was a part of. I mean, Mark was really a part of I've lost track of the acronyms, the names, the number of groups that he was involved in. Like, he never, I don't think he ever slept. Actually, he didn't, except sometimes he'd fall asleep in the middle of class. Just at the page 1 readings, he might fall asleep, but not. He was part of so many things. But yeah, so one of them was Youth Power, which they met a lot up in Albany, and actually the conference where Nick was presenting, which actually was supposed to be a perspectives panel. I was supposed to go, but I was actually in a play that weekend, so I couldn't go. So it was just Nick and Mark. But Youth Power was kind of involved in the conference, and so they were paying a lot of the Youth Power people, Mark being one of them. And Mark felt very compelled to point out to Nick that Youth Power was going to pay for Mark's room, but not for Nick's room. He's like, okay, Nick, you need to understand this. Like, I'm a member of Youth Power, and you're not. So they're going to pay for my room, but they're not going to pay for your room. So you're going to have to get your own room, okay? Because they're not going to pay for your room. They're going to pay for my room, but they're not going to pay for your room. But then, like, again, what he said about Mark not getting things right away. So, and I was on the call for this too, because at this point I thought I was still going. It's like, all right, but Mark, I'm a little confused. Are they going to pay for our room? And he was like, no. Let me tell you again, they're going to pay for my room because I'm a member of Youth Power, but they're not going to pay for your rooms because you're not a member. Okay, Mark, like, I get that, but are they going to pay for our room? He's like, no! So it was just, sometimes it was just fun to take him for a ride. But then, the way that the rooms worked, though, was like they would give each member of Youth Power half a room, and I guess when it came time to like pair up, Mark was like the odd one out, so Nick filled that other half of the slot. So the moral of the story is they paid for his room.
So if you want something, you just have to ask for it enough times.
Yeah, apparently. And so, yeah, we actually kind of forgot about that story for like 4 years, and then that same day you brought up that other thing, we brought up like the Youth Power, and so we were like, hey, wait, is Youth Power going to pay for our dinner today? So that just became like oh, Youth Power is going to pay for it. Anytime we want to do a thing, it became a joke, and eventually Mark was just like, oh God, let it die. And we're like, nah, it's never going to die. So next, let's give a round of applause for John Schindler.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and everyone in between. That would be me. I'm intersex, I'm in between. Hey! So, moving on. I'm one of the original 39 as well. Let's see. I read so many, I have so many volumes from the local Gems Press publications that I couldn't find anything I really felt that would, give, because am I the last speaker at this point? No, okay, all right. Well, okay, when I signed up, I was the last person on the list, so, okay. So I wanted to leave you with a bit of comedy rather than, a bit of the, some of the things that he'd written was just not where I wanted to bring the room. So I knew Mark from the original readings at Dowling, and basically from hearing him read his own poetry, I was totally blown away. When we started hanging out, we knew each other through a couple of different things. I'm another wrinkle in his life because all of my vegan friends are here from the vegan potluck that he used to cook for, and in fact we were supposed to cook for them the weekend before he passed, and we had amongst them also was my friend Stuart, longtime friend from elementary school, but we were also, we worked together at the switchboard at Stony Brook Hospital. So this was Mark's favorite poem of mine, and it's based on, actually, I need my glasses. Hang on a second.
Did you hear the one about the scarecrow that went on a job interview? So it's sitting behind the desk and the person says, so why should I hire you? The scarecrow says, I'm outstanding in my field.
Did Doug Sweezy tell you that one?
Yeah.
Those sound a little different.
Oh, I got another one while he's up there. Okay, did you hear about how the hipster burnt his tongue? He drank his tea before it was cool.
Nice. My favorite joke of that genre is, how was it the definition of steampunk? Which, if people don't know what that is, it's basically like H.P. Lovecraft and H.G. Wells kind of sci-fi people who they basically Victorians with ray guns. Okay, but the joke is that that steampunk is when people in the goth community discover the color brown, because that's like a favorite color. So, let's see. But this was Mark's favorite poem of mine, and it's really more of a prose piece, but it was based off of all of the things that happened when I was training to be a hospital switchboard operator with my friend Stuart. So I've added some new things to it, but basically it's almost everything in here is directly from conversations that I had while answering calls for the hospital. So. So this is called Hospital Switchboard Operators from Hell. Holy Hope Hospital, how may I help you? Please give me infectious diseases. Which ones would you like? I had mono last month. You should have called sooner. Switchboard, how can I direct your call? I need a discharge nurse, stat. What kind of discharge? I have a urology nurse. She deals with discharges. Oops, I think I accidentally sent them on. Urology, could you please hold? Click. I guess they couldn't hold. Good afternoon. Operator Jose. Could you please give me eating disorders? Sure, burp. Sorry, I just came back from lunch. Morning, Holy Hope Hospital. How can I help you? My English is poor. How do you, do you speak Spanish? My Spanish is probably worse than your English, sir. In that case, my wife needs a little off the top. She needs a barber? No. She needs to get something off her chest. She needs an analyst? No. For real, not a figure of speech. She needs breast reduction surgery? That's it! And that's the end. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Yes, another member of the original 39. I'm trying to remember how much, like what the count is here. We've got 2, 3, 4, Robert, 5, 6. There's like 7 of the original 39 here today, which, considering this is like, almost 13 years later, that's pretty cool. It'll be 13 years in March since that first anthology came out. And now there's been over 120 other ones since then. So quite a lot of poetry going around. Large part thanks to Marc. So now for another Marc story interlude. Like you said about how he'd like to go upstate because they have better hotels there. Apparently not everyone, because he was telling one time I think this may have actually even been the same outing where we took our lives in our hands by the Mexican place. Yeah, where we that reckless driving.
Before that, this was at a Barnes and Noble. He was telling this story.
Really?
Yeah.
I don't know. I thought it was, well, anyway, it was the 3 of us just hanging out somewhere that shall remain nameless. And he was talking about a recent trip he went to for some kind of conference or state thing, or, one of the various Save the World panels he was on, up there. And he was asking about, how was that trip he was talking about? He's like, it was all right. He's like, it was also kind of terrible. And it's like, well, what's wrong? He's like, well, all these little things happened. It's like, well, like what? He's like, well, the lighting in the hotel was off. The patterns on the wall really upset my autism. He's like, there was some green goop in the bathtub. I got a Greek salad. It didn't have enough dressing. I dropped my luggage in a bent corner in my book, and then I got hit by a fucking SUV. And we were and we were like, Marc, it seems like one of these things is not like the others. Just saying. And, so it was just one of those things where he was just going off this list of just pedantic, not mattering at all, and that was just thrown in there. So it's like, well, I guess you're really dedicated. So yeah, not all hotels upstate apparently are created equal. Just saying about that. Next, let's give a hand for Andrea Shirali.
I don't do public speaking, which is why I've never gone to these things. I just went to the bookstore opening. I don't think before I speak, I have no idea what I'm going to say, so bear with me. And I actually don't care what anyone thinks, like Mark, which is good because a lot of my views do not align with his, or I'm sure most of yours, but I'm just going to say what I feel. So I've known Mark since I moved to Long Island in the second grade. We went to school together, like same people always, not like different schools for the same district. So people were mean, Avi, and he was always super smart. Like different, like in a good way. He always surprised me with his knowledge. I remember in biology class, people were annoyed because everything was so easy for him, like intellectually. I remember in class he would always say it's simple and then explain something like really complicated really fast and everyone's like what? Yeah, and then he was always so good to me and my sister, and I have no memory. I learned that's something else we have in common, so I can't give any like stories. But how he made me feel, he always made me feel like I deserved more in life. I ran into him on the train, which I didn't know he took often until today. Yeah, I was also one of those like, my only fear besides public speaking and shaking, cannot make eye contact, changing lanes and merging on the highway. So I was on the train and he was on the train and I'm like, Mark, what? I hadn't seen him in forever, and I had moved back to Long Island and we just talked the whole time, and then we got back in touch, and we would have mostly like just long Facebook Messenger. I think he removed me. I must have said something like non-PC. iMessage. Yeah, I made like one comment once, and I don't know. I don't know if the memorial, like if it just says like, I don't know if you ever work with, I don't know, but whatever. Yeah, I would say things like I use the word retard. I can defend all of my ways logically, and Mark, he knew me and I knew him and who we are, like take people on a case-by-case basis. So I could be myself around him, and it was refreshing. And I don't know, my sister went through a bunch of stuff. Unfortunately, she's in Brazil now, but they had their own little like friendship, which I didn't even know about until I told my dad. He lives around here, geography female. I told him I was coming, and he was like, oh, he was like singing Mark's praises. I'm like, how the F do you know about Mark? And he's like, he always did right by you and your sister. And yeah, I don't remember much, but I remember how like Mark made me feel, and like I always felt protective of him. That's how I felt about him. I always wanted to protect him. He destroyed my first crush, besides Hugh Grant, was 10 years, at least I'm consistent, and Mark destroyed him because he was mean to Mark. We were waiting outside for the English class to open. I don't remember what happened, unsurprisingly, but he was just like cold, and I was disgusted, you know? Like, oh, like goody good Protestant, I'm like shut the F up, so fake. I know, aged terribly, thank God. And then Mark and I, we didn't agree on most things, and then the last time I saw him, well, second to last time at the event, the bookstore opening, which I was terrified to go to, and he would always offer, when I would visit my mom on Long Island, he would always offer rides to go to these events. I'm kind of glad I didn't. I might not be here today. Actually, none of us, we would have gone sooner, I guess. But yeah, he would always like go out of his way to, like super inconvenient. Like she was in Mineola, and then my dad's in Deer Park now, and we're, yeah, he would always offer, and I was never brave enough to go. I was never brave enough to read anything out loud. But yeah, and he was just a good person. I know a lot of people here are atheists, so I guess death should be probably easier to swallow because we'll all be together one day decomposing. But for Mark, like I truly believe that he is in a better place. My initial reaction was, even if it's like a state of limbo until something else. First, I was like freaking out when I found out like not that long ago. It was unexpected. I was in shock, and I just felt like why? Because the other people who died from our high school, like, I don't know. I feel like the best gift they could have given the world is exiting it, including one ex-boyfriend who Mark ruined. Yes, he was mean. He was objectively mean. He was objectively mean. And Mark I was like on the train, and like we were talking about it. I've seen him in Barnes and Nobles and trains and random combos. And Mark was like, he made one like scathing comment and like heart healed, you know? I was like, thanks. Yes, he always was like so genuine, and I don't know like where he is. I guess we'll find out or not. But I truly believe that he is at peace and that this world did not deserve him. And he had a good heart. And I always felt that, and I was never ashamed, or I could say whatever I wanted. We mostly talked about like random things like humanities and my favorite topic, love, and like romantic type, not friendship. But it was always just so honest and refreshing. Like we cut through like everything else, and I didn't even know about all of his accomplishments and his goals. The second to last time at the bookstore, he told me about like law school, and I was surprised. Not surprised knowing him, but I was proud of him, very proud. And I just felt like when I was reading on the website, like everything he did for autism, I didn't know anything. I didn't even know he was gay until that bookshop day. I told him. I was like, he was like talking about his partner. I'm like, or something. And I'm like, Mark, like, I was like, oh, are you gay or bi? And then I said something super crass. Oh, I don't think there's such thing as like a bi male. And I didn't even know. I may suspected something, but we never, like, none of that mattered to us. And I don't know. And I was reading about the law, like, and what he did for autism, and it just felt like such an effing waste. There's a poem, it's really good. I think it's John Updike, my memory. It's Perfection Wasted, or vice versa. You guys can look it up and read it in your own time. But if you're blind, I'm sure there's a recording of it. But I will miss Mark a lot, and I really hope that we're reunited one day. And if we're not, that at least he's like somewhere better, and like that deserves him. And I feel like I don't know, at least we'll remember him like young and funny, and it was really good to hear everyone like talk about him and stuff.
Thank you, Andrea. Okay, no problem. No, it's all good.
Sorry.
No, I was going to say, you don't have to feel bad, though, about fighting with him from time to time. Lord knows I may have done that once or twice myself. Just once or twice.
It lasts very briefly.
Yeah. Now, Mark and I kind of had like that, almost familial thing where it was like we could be screaming bloody murder at each other 1 second and be like, Mark, why would you do that? You're so stupid. Why do you do that? You always do this. You always do this. By the way, what'd you think of that poem that person read? Like he would just switch over like immediately, be like, oh, I thought it was really good. Oh, okay. And yeah, Mark, why did you do that? Like we would just go back and forth or whatever. Actually, one of his poems that I will actually share, because sometimes me and him, would kind of get together and sort of like just, oh no. In this copy, the page was perforated. That's great. We would sometimes get together early on and just bitch about things, essentially. So this poem is called Bitch Night.
That was about you?
Yeah. It was me and him in a Taco Bell parking lot after a page 1 reading, actually. Order up 3 bean burritos, 3 cheese roll-ups, 1 cheese nachos, tons of those salsa packets, take it to go. Discuss life's bitchery in the parking lot. Nothing's off limits. From your erectile dysfunction to my utter ineptitude of relationships outside the bedroom, from your ex who might be fucking her brother, to my carpet that got raped that New Year's, and even the fact that McDonald's doesn't accept condoms as a form of payment is fair game. Welcome to Bitch Night. Let the rage begin. Now, I don't know where some of that came from, but the condoms at McDonald's, I do know where that one came from. Actually, Mark wasn't even there for that, but he loved that story like no other. One time there was a club that used to be in Patchogue called Karma that me and some Dowling people used to go to, and I was usually the designated driver, because, yeah. So there were, one time there were 3 other guys, so one of them actually had his car at the place and he needed to drive home, so he was like, I need to sober up, so we decided, well, let's just soak it all up with some McDonald's. So go to the nearest McDonald's drive-thru, looking at like what to get, and then the guy in the back seat rolls down the window and he pulls out this long string of golden covered condoms and he's like, do you accept condoms as payment? Like to the drive-thru person, and they're like, ¿qué? It's like, lo siento, necesito hamburguesas con queso. Yeah, no, just, it was one of those deals, but, yeah, so another interlude Mark story. Now, I don't know all the details of this, but I do know that there was a program at his old high school. I said that because Andrea was at his high school, so it just reminded me of that. At his old high school where he was, there was like a program where community members could go back and teach a course on like life experiences or whatever. And I remember Mark talking to me about it. He was really, really excited to go there. And he was like, I'm going to have them do this and write about this and talk about this or whatever. And so he was doing it for a few weeks. And then, we were talking about other stuff, and so I asked him, like, oh, by the way, how's that course going? He's like, well, the principal had to come and talk to me. And I'm like, why? He's like, well, apparently assigning these kids 12 papers in 3 weeks is too much. And I'm like, well, what did you do? He's just like, all these things. I want him to write about this, and this. And I'm like, well, that was just Mark for you, He's like, so instead I give him the option they have to write any 2 of those topics. I'm like, that seems more fair, They have other things to go on. So next, let's give a hand for Donna Zafreen.
It was a shock for all of us when we heard that Mark had passed away. I had known him for a few years, I believe back in 2014. And we went to his homes. See it hanging down. It's called in response to your platform. You say we have to find a cure. A cure for what? It is a cure for who I am, my personality, my hopes, my dreams, my passions. It is a cure for what I am, my intelligence, my wit, my charm, my sarcasm. It is a cure for what I can be, my ambitions, my interests, my perseverance, my goals. If not any of those, then what do you hate? It is because you have my differences, my beliefs, my morals, my ethics, my strengths. It is because you hate that I am not you. It is my difference such a crime that it must be destroyed. Better yet, can you tell me why? Why do you hate me? Who can I exist as I am? Why do you have to care my healthy mind? Why do you have to treat me as inhumane? Who are you trying to help? It is the fetus you scream and out and short for having the wrong genders. It is the child you yell at for hearing wrong in ways he will never understand. It is the adult you allow to die through your silence. It is the hole in your heart which you stain with your cruelty. Do you blame a vaccine for my existence? Am I some freak of science who has no right to exist? Am I nothing more than the shadow of your own twisted heart? Do I only exist to remind you that you can't live your life through mine? Do I hold any value to you other than a symbol of all you hate? Or is it just that you fear that you are one of my brethren, that the very thing you have spoken of as fifth and disease could actually hold purpose, value, and worth? Would I then be nothing more than than your horrifying funhouse mirror? These questions I pose to you, all knowing, normal people. You say you speak for me, so why not give me some answers? Thank you.
Thank you, Donna. Was there anybody else who didn't get to sign up on the list who wants to come up, either read a poem in honor of Mark, share a story about Mark? Okay, Damien, come on up.
My name's Damien. I attend the poetry events, the Bard's dog-eared bookstore, dog-eared Bard's bookstore, and I got the pleasure of meeting Mark and a few beautiful occurrences, short-lived in the moments that they were, as I was caught between places, and truly feeling a presence that definitely drew a lot of great attention and brought some positive energy to the events. And so, learning more about him through all of you, I've synthesized a mosaic cento based on some of the things we were talking about. So I'd like to share some of what I learned about Mark and you guys. And then first I'm going to have to just say, please accept and forgive all of this pain from above. So we let out all this gratitude and breathe in the love. The edges of what could have been, the reaction of metabolizing a significant realization about how important our relationships are with others, aligned with the shiny side of things, alive with the mighty tide of that which makes our heart sing. Over tea party time table saw grinds that cut short before we could even fall behind. Over the hill, ahead of the curve, kicking the can, past the pale horse, buying the farm, pushing the daisies, hitting the fan, maintaining the course. This life is not a curse, for better or for the worse. Let us take this blessing in with deepening appreciations, leading to more reasons for celebration. For you are the occasion. And these are the conversations. Telling the stories and redeeming our space, restoring the glory of meaning with a smile waiting to remake your face. Returning your cheeks to that familiar position where we remember affording each other the attention we deserve. To preserve our collective legacy in this highly respected community, passing along the torch of passion in beauty. So that's the first one. Thank you. So Mark had a lot of angles, he had a lot of different parts and pieces to him. And so naturally, learning about that, I have a few other shorter ones to share, if you'd like. Do you know about the Stonewall Law? Yeah, it's a civil disability rights guarantee, serving celestial justice with a cudgel of love and a label that says, trust us. Trust us to push us in this movement towards a hug. And that's the first clause to the Stonewall Laws. So that's the one. Thank you. This one. We won't need any filters where we're going. Censored only where the mind stops growing. Looking at an empty chair, wondering why the balancing act between us always seems so unfair. Left bare. No ground given. Only the pure, unadulterated vow to provide plenty rolling a loaded motion of life fixed on a natural 20. No modifiers necessary. Got another one. Thank you. Yes, it's true. We lost a member. But ladies and germs, we have a contender. A champion of the sun. A wave maker in the ocean. A lover of what's to come. Authentically yours and poetically stored in the ordinary everyday collection of dust, building up in the corner of every room, the back of every house, that saves an extra plate for their creative dining love besides our lives, renting a space in our hearts, in our heads, in our hands, through the works, both great and small, recognized by all. Thank you. A lesson between the pieces here. Sorrow, it carves hard into the soul, setting love's rivers around mountains of joy to pools of grace. Though suffering, as we know it, is a universal language, heard across barriers throughout every kingdom. The birds know it, the bees know it, and now, beyond any doubt, we have come to know it. So let's take this universal language, refined by the survivors of love's brief rest between these moments of life and death. For you see, intellectual prowess is helping those who feel powerless by imparting knowledge and frolicking from topic to topic. Perhaps a physicist could relieve us of the pressure surrounding the principle of thermodynamics and the laws of conservation, though, as we know, atomically speaking, nothing is the only thing that ever really mattered, and etherically speaking, everything has already been. So forget the fussing and fighting, my friends, and remember, if there's a pattern, then why should it ever end? Thank you.
Thank you, Damien. And yeah, for those who don't know, we call Damien the synthesizer because he likes to write cento poems where he takes lines from all the previous poems that have been read and kind of make a new poem out of them. So some of those lines may have been familiar. So that was kind of like the sum up of what's been going on this evening. Bill?
Wow, it's great to be here. It's great to see everybody here. Sorry I'm late. I had a family party. But, you know, I didn't know Mark well, but I knew Mark. And I know one of the things that Mark liked, he had a really good sense of humor. And he loved George Carlin. So I happen to have written a George Carlin poem. So that's why I want to read that here tonight. It's called New Year's Thoughts of George Carlin. I dig it, get it, glean it, and I mean it. I understand it and know it now. I admit and absorb it. I hatch and catch and snatch it. I bring it home, baby. I realize as well as recognize it. Grasping and clasping it, I claw it, clutch it, cling to it, cleave it to me. I find and follow it, and I swallow it. Sighting and spotting it, tracing it and tracking it down, I make it out now. Discovering, detecting, inspecting, learning, discerning, I perceive it and I believe it. I can comprehend it, I can even care about it. Reflecting upon it all, I see what is now crystal clear. Gawked at, glared at, squawked at, stared at, considered, contemplated, deliberated, postulated, positioned, postured, posed, in perspective, a point of view, angle, aspect, attitude, a new and exciting approach, sloping, slanted, askew, tilted, turning, twisted, twirled, way of thinking, mindset, frame of mind, state of mind, today's obscure observation, demure presentation, revulsion, revelation, repulsion, proclamation, fiduciary obligation, fruit, juicy masturbation, erection, ejection, compulsion, expulsion, defecation, situation. We are all insecure. Quit your bitching and moaning. Happy New Year. Get over it.
Thank you, Phil. So was there anyone else who didn't get to sign up on the list who has a poem or a story or anything that they want to share about Mark? Go.
I've got a couple more Mark stories.
Come up for a couple more Mark stories.
Open mine. Just two.
No, just two?
Well, I've got tons of them, but only two that I feel like telling right now. So, Mark was known for that George Carlin poem. I mean, we heard it earlier today. He loved that poem. I love that poem. The poem's amazing. And he would really get into those performances. When it was like he was giving a sermon. And back when we were launching a book of comedy poetry called Rhyme and Punishment, I came up for the launch, and it was at this little like one-room house place somewhere, I don't remember where. And I got the best picture of Mark giving his poem, and he had his arm up and his eyes were closed, his face was twisted in ecstasy as he's giving this poem. And I got this picture, and I sent it to him. I said, this needs to be your profile picture on Facebook. Not thinking he would use it, and he used it. But one night, I was sitting there, and I was playing with this tool that lets you turn actual photos into coloring book pictures. And just out of a joke, I took Mark's picture and turned it into a coloring book picture. And I said, Mark, this is your new profile picture. Thinking he would say, no, I'm not going to use that. He put that up as his profile picture. And it was his Facebook picture for a long time.
It still is.
It is?
Yeah, it is.
See, that shows you how many times I get on Facebook these days. But I just thought he was always in on his own jokes, which was great. And that picture, it just really captured the soul of that performance. And one last story, James, Mark, and I had a blog talk radio show that we did for a little while after Perspectives came out, and I sort of got involved with things.
2.5 years.
Really? Was that long?
Yeah.
Wow. There's a group out of Canada called, what were they called again? Anka. Yeah, Naturally Autistic Anka. And so we had this show where we would bring on guests and we would talk about things. I mean, that's usually what you do on a show. But one day, James and I were on a call with Leo, who was the woman who ran the organization. Mark was not there, and I don't remember why, and Mark came up as a topic. And Leo said something to the effect of, she made it almost sounded like you guys are his only friends. But she said, Mark considers you guys both really good friends. I don't think he's that close with anyone else. And that's the first time anybody had ever said anything like that, at least when I was around. James probably heard a lot more of this. And that kind of hit home because I didn't realize how important both the poetry stuff that we were doing, but also the autism advocacy stuff that we were doing was to Mark. And that really was what he was about. And doing those things with us just meant a lot more to him than I realized. And that was kind of a big moment for me. And that's really what he was about. But also, once you were Mark's friend, he was there. He was he knew how to be a good friend, and he knew who his friends were. He may have gone out and hung out with a bunch of different groups of people, but when it came down to it, and when you actually got cut down to the unfiltered Mark that I was talking about before, he knew who his friends really were, and he was always there for them. So that's how I like to remember Mark, and I think everybody else should too. So.
Thank you, Nick. I thought you were going to tell a very different story about a radio show where Mark wasn't there.
Oh, that one?
Yeah.
Well, that's not a Mark story, though.
Well, kind of, yeah, because one of our co-hosts was Maria Ilio, with she has a local group, Athena Chisagata. She actually did a Zoom memorial for Mark. Actually, there were so many Zoom memorials for him, I lost track of them. I couldn't keep, Unfortunately, there's only one of me. Well, maybe fortunately, there's only one of me. So it was like there were so many happening, so many times, so many different places. I couldn't go to all of them, but. Now, one time Mark was late to one of the shows or whatever, and she was like, "Where's Mark?" We're like, "I don't know where he is." She's like, "Oh, hopefully he didn't crash into a porch." Because
this is the first time I found out that it was like a week or two earlier he crashed into a porch.
Yeah. So again, Rita, we were praying for you every time it was in the Yeah. Oh yeah. No. Yeah. So. Yeah, it's like there were a bunch of other recent memorials for Mark, but I don't think there was any community that was as important to him as long as the poetry community on Long Island, because when I first met him, like all the way back at Dowling, he was very pretty isolated, and there wasn't a lot that he really did. There's a lot he wanted to do, and he had a lot of ideas, and in a lot of ways he really influenced everything that I did. Like I was actually kind of thinking. Like there's not much that I do in my day-to-day life now that Mark didn't influence in some way. The bookstore that I own and operate, everything that led to that wouldn't have happened without Mark, the publishing company or whatever. I mean, even my wife, who I met her for the first time in the presence of Mark. In fact, my first memory of her was how she was slightly annoyed that Mark wouldn't shut up. She wasn't, she hadn't acquired the Markness quite yet. But no, it was a writing club meeting we had over the summer of 2010, and it was just four of us. I went with Mark and the other founder, and she was one of the founders. And so, Mark, it was one of those things where we were talking about stuff, and Mark was like so excited about talking about the writing, he would just like constantly interrupt, and she would just kind of have this like look. But
I'd always interrupt you and say not what you were going to say next. Try to guess what you were going to say next.
Yeah,
and get it wrong.
that was always funny. You could almost play like Jeopardy of like what's he going to put in in there that doesn't fit. You can make a puzzle book out of it actually. But yeah, I mean, I met a lot of the poets in this room. A lot of the original 39, like I was saying, that I actually met in the presence of Marc Rosen. So he was there for part of it, and once he was part of this community, he was there so much. And it's like the idea that walking into a poetry reading, never going to see him in the corner again. Sometimes on his phone, acting like he's not paying attention, but really is. Other times, looking up and just really enthusiastic, or oh, hi, Mark. Never going to have that again. In fact, a little personal moment here was when I was kind of going on the journey to Philadelphia, because I found out on the Monday after, because Rita had actually messaged me frantically because she got an email from Mark's mom, and it was like, and the funeral is tomorrow in Philadelphia. It's like, okay, that's quick, but so sorry. I know Andrea's not here, but the part about going to a better place, Philadelphia. Sorry about that. I'm a morbid humor kind of guy, in case you can't tell. But so I was driving out there, and I was just listening to all sorts of stuff in the CDs. It took me 5 hours to get out there, so I actually missed the frickin' ceremony because, of course, he had to do this on a holiday weekend. It was just. But it took me 5 hours to get out there. The next day it took me 6 hours to get back. Philadelphia is supposed to be a 2.5 hour journey. It's just one of those deals. But as I was listening to CDs and stuff, the Les Mis soundtrack was on. And one of the tracks that came up was the song Empty Chairs at Empty Tables. And when I heard that song while I was driving at that day, I lost it like a little baby. So on the way out there, in fact, I had to pull over for a moment because I couldn't actually see. And my glasses were fogging up or whatever. So I feel it only appropriate, since this is a sharing thing, to give a little rendition of that song. So forgive the a cappella nature of this, but and I think the words really speak true to this. There's a grief that can't be spoken. There's a pain goes on and on. Empty chairs at empty tables. Now my friends are dead and gone. Here they talked of revolution. Here it was they lit the flame, here they sang about tomorrow, and tomorrow never came. From the table in the corner, they could see a world reborn, and they rose with voices ringing. I can hear them now, the very words that they had sung became their last communion on this lonely barricade at dawn. Oh, my friends, forgive me that I live and you are gone. There's a grief that can't be spoken. There's a pain goes on and on. Phantom faces at the windows, phantom shadows on the floor, empty chairs at empty tables where my friends will meet no more. Oh, my friends, don't ask me what your sacrifice was for. Empty chairs at empty tables where my friends will sing no more. Yeah, kind of think about never going to see him walk in through the door at the store again, and just that song always pops into my head. So, now to round this up, I'd like to tell a story called Pancakes in the Microwave. Got to end it a little bit on a funny note. All right, so some of you may have experienced that Marc was not always the most coordinated, and sometimes was a little clumsy and did some things that were a little kooky. Maybe, just a little bit. So, once upon a time in the land of Oakdale, there was a college known as Dowling. It's not there anymore. And it used to have a dormitory. And in this dormitory, once upon a time, there was a boy named Marc Rosen, who had a roommate whose name I do not know. But as legend has it, on one particular night in the middle of winter, while it was snowing, this roommate apparently bugged Marc to make him some food at 3 in the morning. Marc claimed he was half asleep, but got up to do it anyway, and decided that making pancakes by pouring pancake batter in the microwave on the microwave tray was a good idea. Apparently, he turned the microwave on for like 15 minutes and went back and fell asleep. Beep, 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 woo, woo, woo. The fire department came and evacuated the entire Dowling dorm at 3 in the morning while it was snowing. Everybody was on the lawn, in their pajamas, in the freezing cold, staring at Marc. And Marc was just like, I didn't do it. The next year, he was in an apartment off campus. The end. No. Now I'm thinking this should be a children's book. Anyway, so there was a lot of powerful stuff here today. Thank you all for being a part of it. I know there was a lot more people here earlier. I know people had to leave and some people came late. Gonna miss you, Marc. Looking at this, the 13 years of history on this board, it's just, again, life happens when you're not paying attention. So, so be kind, say hi to people you haven't said hi to in a long time, and appreciate every moment. Thank you, everybody.